Well, all right. Actually, to make sure I'm on the right one. All right. I just had to make sure I was on the right Wi-Fi. Hey, everybody. What's up, Grayson? What's up, Jacob? What's up, Will? All my boys. All right. He's here. The real dude. What's up?
Hello.
Awesome. Sweet. So what's up, everybody? I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll let you introduce yourself for whoever's watching. So I think
Perfect.
most of you guys follow me. I'm Elijah, Christian, aspiring pastor. I love apologetics and talking about the faith and the questions surrounding it. I make TikToks about this all the time, and I talk about it. So I thought this would be a really great opportunity. Go take it away.
I'm Arnold Heisenberg, not my real name. I'm an atheist.
I'm always gonna call you that, dude. I'm no way I call you Arnold. You're Heisenberg
Yeah.
for me.
I'm an atheist. I make TikToks about it and philosophy. And I mostly, if you follow my TikTok, I mostly, my goal is to get a rise out of people. But this is not that. This is serious. This is, I'm not trying to get a rise out of him. I'm trying to turn my TV off here. Sorry. But yeah. So I have my Bible here on my tablet. Which version do you prefer so we're on the same one?
I use the ESV.
I don't know what it is, but I can download it real quick. I use Blue Letter Bible.
As long as you're, what'd you say?
I use Blue Letter Bible mostly.
Right. Yeah. I have the app for that, but because I have my physical Bible right now, I don't have one of those.
Right.
My computer's dead right now, so I couldn't even pull it.
My physical Bible is in my office space. I don't have any heat in that room. There's no heat in there, so I'm in my living room on my tablet. So there we go. ESV.
Yeah, English Standard Version.
Okay.
If you're on the Bible app, you shouldn't have to download it. As long as you have connection, you can just open it. But
I have data on my tablet.
They don't take that long.
I don't know how to change my crap. I guess I should have asked you how to do this. I don't know how to change my version here.
When you click at the top, then it should say the version. You just click the acronym, and then it'll pull up a whole list of all the versions. If not, if you can't figure it out shortly here, then it's fine. We'll just use different versions. It's okay.
All right, I use King James Version mostly.
Right.
I mean, whatever, but
it's cool. It's whatever.
Right. My 3 questions, and nothing deep, nothing like. I figure I'll keep it light. Not gonna try to make you prove the universe is real, but
right.
It's a nice little
simulation.
Yeah, no, yeah. My son actually had an existential crisis in school today. Like he was like staring into nowhere, and I got a phone call from the assistant principal saying he's in my office dreading that the universe exists. I'm like, wow. I'm like, you're 11, bro. Just I'm like, I'm raising a little Nietzsche. But yeah, so I don't know if you want to begin. You can start.
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So my first question is, having talked to you a bit and learning that you were a layman's minister in the military, right? And you were at one point like openly Christian and all of that. Were there certain events or like parts of the faith or whatever? Basically, what caused you to eventually go from someone who was openly Christian to now an atheist and a nihilist?
The Bible. That's the short answer.
So maybe
right. No. The short answer is the Bible. I mean, I studied it like with the intent of understanding it and knowing it and teaching it. Because when I got out of the Navy, my intent was to go to a biblical college and be a minister proper. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that there are claims in it that don't make sense to me. I don't want to say they don't make sense because I'm not in your shoes, but they don't make sense to me.
Right.
So I basically reverse engineered my faith, if you will. I postulated what is the likelihood that all of the global religions practiced are simultaneously correct? And of course, the answer to that is it's not possible. So,
Right.
what is the
I agree.
likelihood that all of the religions practiced today are simultaneously incorrect? And that is a probable. That is probable. They could all be incorrect. So, until there is evidence for one, I will refrain from all. I will hold a null position. That's basically how I became an atheist. I mean, nihilism, kind of. I believe, in my opinion, that logic and reason leads to nihilism. But
Okay. Yeah. So like what specific claims made by the Bible drove you there? Just so I can understand better.
right, like yelling at a wall and making it fall. That's a big one. An ass talking, a donkey. Sorry, because you're gonna put
Yeah.
a donkey talking, snakes talking. I mean, things that are demonstrably not something you would see on a daily basis. You don't see a donkey talking every day,
Yeah.
or a snake for that matter, or people shouting at a wall for 7 days and then it falls. Do you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
historical claims
I mean, I
that
think
seemed outrageous.
yeah. So that I'll reference. You know who William Jennings Bryan, I think is his name. He was a lawyer in the 1920s. And there's a quote from this trial they did in the 20s where it was the fundamentalists versus the Protestant or the liberal Protestants who were arguing that the Bible was figurative, really, that these outrageous stories were false, and that they were merely allegories, that they were for the purpose of moral tellings and stories. And his response, basically, that the reason the trial was happening was because a teacher in Tennessee or something like that taught Charles Darwin's theory, and of course the Christians lost their minds. I don't have a problem with people teaching Charles Darwin's theory, but they did at the time because it was relatively new, and so they were like, no,
You talk
that
about
shouldn't be in schools because it was very different.
you talk about the Scopes monkey
And
trial.
so what?
Was it you talk about the Scopes monkey trial?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Right. And so what? So they asked him, so do you believe that Jonah was really swallowed by a whale? And Jennings' response was, one miracle was as likely as another. And so I definitely get what you're saying, but like what I'll say is that like every miracle in the Bible is equally outrageous because they're miracles. And so I definitely see where you're coming from with seeing miracles and saying like, that is not something that we can, scientifically observe and measure. And so I definitely understand why those could push someone away from belief in Christ, or at least from a literal interpretation of the Bible. But again, like I totally sympathize, but like my understanding aligns with his, and it's that I'm not trying to prove that miracles are like measurable, but that they happen. That they may not be humanly possible, but they happen by divine measure. So if there is, this is really what the schism is that if you believe in a divine figurehead, then it is possible. If you don't, then it's not. And so that's where the gap would come from. But I totally understand the view of the claims of miracles. I get that for sure.
Right. So I guess my first question would be, I'll start with in the Garden of Eden, God created the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right. So before they took of the tree, they didn't know what was right and wrong. Okay. So they didn't know what was right and wrong at all until they ate the tree. Then they gained the knowledge of what was right and what was wrong. Okay. So I'm in. Well, I don't have the verse. I forgot to write it down, but you know where I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's in Genesis 3.
Yeah.
Let me read it.
It's the only question I didn't write a verse down for. My apologies.
No, you're good. I just want to find the exact verse where it talks about the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Because it says, "For if you eat it, you shall die." But
yeah. Okay. Right. So okay.
All right. So we're on the same page.
Wait, no, I want. No, I'm trying to. I was saying right as in like I know the verse, but I'm
Oh,
trying
bro.
to.
Because that's not my question.
I can't. Okay, right. So what you're referencing is not actually what God says about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's what Satan says about it. Satan says, in chapter 3, verse 5, the serpent or the Satan says, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." That's the claim that Satan makes about the tree. That's not actually what God says about the
He
fruit.
calls it
And so
the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what it's called. That's its
right, and
name.
I think it was their learning of the capacity
Right.
of evil, right? Because they had no sinful nature before they did that, and so in the act of obedience, evil becomes apparent, and it becomes essentially materializes as they act in that moment.
But
So I don't think it's like I don't think that they were aimlessly existing without a moral compass.
right,
But I
that
think that
wasn't my question.
where they lived was
My question was, if they didn't know good from evil before eating the fruit, how did they know it was wrong to do so? Because in order to know it was wrong, you have to know right from wrong. And they
right.
didn't know it before they ate it. Therefore, how could it be wrong? Or how could they know it was
Well, so my understanding of it is that really what it was that the world and their consciousness were absent of evil, right? And so this is where we see from the Christian perspective, the fulfillment and the peak of human free will, where they actually have a choice between obedience and disobedience. And so when we see God describe creation, like man knows that God has described creation as good, right? They know of good, but not of evil. So they know that obedience to God is good, right? Because they have commands from God, and we can assume for however long it doesn't tell us that they followed them and knew that following the commands of God were good. This meant then that the opposite would not be good. And so they don't actually, evil itself is not materialized, and evil is not something that they can observe or know or come into contact with until they've disobeyed God and violated what they knew to be good. So I don't think that they had no understanding of what was right and what was wrong. I think they knew what was right and had no temptation for it.
interesting? That's not
So
the
there was
answer I
no
usually give.
drive.
I mean, usually,
There was no drive for evil in them.
right. Because at this point, the only command that they really had was don't eat that fruit. And take care
Well,
of
no. So
children.
there was be fruitful and multiply. There was that you're supposed to take care of the land. You're supposed to rule over the animals.
Actually, be fruitful and multiply happened after they were ejected from the garden.
But this was a command that God was technically reminding them of when He removes them. This was something that they were still called to do before they were removed from the garden. We can naturally assume that God's plan for them would have been to procreate. In fact, we actually don't know like when Cain and Abel exactly were born. Wait, that's a lie. Let me correct myself there. It says after they were removed, now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. Right. So they had children after the garden, but the natural assumption is that they would have been called. I need to collect myself here. So we look at the when God is talking to them, the actual punishment for them for violating God's command to them is like pain during pregnancy, and it is that there is a struggle in reaping things from the land, like farming, and the cursed is the ground because of you, God says to him. And so I think
My number was leaked on internet, and I have trolls that are calling my number. I have to put on Do Not Disturb. I'll be right back.
all right, for sure.
All right. That should take care of that. My apologies. Yeah, somebody leaked my number. Like,
You're good.
I have people who don't like me on here, funny enough, and they have my phone number. And
Yeah, that's obnoxious. That's
my
annoying.
apologies.
You're good. I'm reading back at this. Right. So what we see in God, where He basically is reprimanding them after they've disobeyed.
I lost you.
Sorry. He says, "I will surely." So when God is reprimanding them for disobeying, He says, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing." Right. In pain you shall bring forth children. Right. So the natural implication is that before then, childbirth was not painful. If childbirth is now painful, this means that childbirth had to have existed before, but it wasn't painful. And then He says, Cursed is the ground because of you, in pain you shall eat of it of all the days of your life. Which, again, we know that they were called then to tend to the land and take care of it, but it came naturally as it was their intended purpose in the garden. So that was a command that was given to them, but it was something that became difficult and something that God verbalizes and explains will be more challenging, which we then can make the natural assumption that it existed before then. And I'm trying to find when God actually says, be fruitful and multiply, because I can't find the exact verse, but someone said that it was before they were actually ejected from Eden.
I could open my concordance.
I'm just trying to. Well, okay. Well, we at least see in right. So I lost it. Genesis 1:28. All right, I lost it for a second. Okay.
I had to block the number.
Okay.
I had to block the number. It's
Cool,
driving
no
me.
worries. It's Genesis 1:28. They're still in the garden, and God says, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on earth." So, right. So that's one of the first commands He gives them. So they had commands from God before they were rejected. They were to follow, which would mean that they knew that following God was good, because that's what they did until the actual fall. So they knew that that was good until they acted in disobedience because they were tempted, right? Until they were drawn to evil by an outside source because they had no capacity for evil in and of themselves, until they were tempted to it by an outside source, evil had not materialized, and they only knew what was good.
Okay.
And so it's perfection in humanity, basically, and that God called them very good, that they were as good as they were made to be, until they reject God's commands.
Okay. I mean, it's an answer. I mean, I'm not. I wasn't trying to have a gotcha moment. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. The Bible can be confusing, and I
Now
understand the way that you read
one
that
of my
and interpret
questions
it.
is
I
kind
see
of.
where that can come from.
But yeah. But all right. Did you want to ask your next one?
Yeah. Okay. So what we see, like in humanity, is that the reason we do things is for our survival. It's like for our betterment, right? So does the atheistic and the nihilistic worldview, because I don't know, because that's not the view, I've never aligned with that. So does that worldview like actually bring you happiness, and do you feel that there's benefit in the atheistic or the nihilistic view?
Well, I can only speak for myself.
Right. Yeah. I just want to know.
Right. I believe as a nihilist that all life is suffering, and our purpose, or my purpose, should be to mitigate that as much as I can.
Yeah.
So anything I can do, my personal suffering.
Yeah. That's so. I'm sorry that's happening. That's so annoying. That's
Yeah.
so frustrating.
Yeah. Hi. This is what Trump supporters do when they don't like you, they disrupt your life. So
Yeah. I don't. There's no justification for that.
and most of these are little children. Like
that's just not how you should respond to people you don't agree with.
17 years old, 16 years old. But there it is. Either way, no. Personally, for me, being an atheist, I don't claim. I don't make the truth claim that there are no gods. Most atheists don't. Because
Right.
making that truth claim says, well, then I have the burden of proof. Do you know what I mean? If I were to say definitively there are no gods, well, then I'm shouldered with the burden of proof of proving there are no gods. I simply say I don't see evidence that there are any. So I hold that I live my life as though they're not. People say that's agnosticism, but I really see agnosticism as not like a middle ground, because you could be an agnostic Christian, because Gnosticism deals with knowledge, and atheism deals with faith. So agnosticism says I don't know, and Gnosticism says I do know. So if you're a Gnostic Christian, it means you definitely know there is a God, and you believe there is one, and you live your life as though there were. If you're a Gnostic atheist, it means you know for certain there are no gods, and you live your life as though there aren't any. But if you're an agnostic atheist, it means you don't know for certain that there aren't, but you live as though there aren't. And if you're an agnostic Christian, you live your life as though there are, even though you don't know for certain. I mean, I would argue that it's not possible to be a Gnostic anything, because if you knew for certain that there was a God, if you had direct knowledge, you wouldn't require faith. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and you would just know. You wouldn't need to believe it. You would just know it.
Well, I look at it as, for me, I was actually thinking about this earlier, that when it comes to, for me at least, and this is my view, that maybe initially, but where I stand now, that for most Christians, faith doesn't play a role in belief that there is a God, right? And I want to elaborate more on that. I don't think faith, as it is referred to in Christianity, simply means believing that there is a God. I think it means believing that Jesus is that God, right? And so I want to elaborate more on that. And we see Jesus say, "Repent and believe." Well, all the Jews believed in a God, so clearly that's not the kind of belief that he's talking about, right? He tells them they don't have any faith, even though they believe in a God. So my assertion, my understanding is that, when I was younger, this was an issue, but now I don't say, "God, give me faith to believe that there is a God," right? Otherwise, like, I have certainty that God exists, and that's why I pray to him. Like, that's why. No, you're good. You're fine. It's totally fine. That's really annoying. But yeah, so personally, I think faith is not about belief that God exists, but belief that God is who he says he is, right?
Right. Well,
and faith is about,
because the word faith
so
comes from the Greek word pistis, which just means to trust.
right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that trust. It's not trust that he is real. It's trusting him in the same way that you would trust some, like for example, like I trust someone else because I know them, because I trust that they can. I trust them with the information or the resource or whatever, or like part of myself that I give to them because I trust them. And so I think that being a Christian entails much more than just believing in God. In fact, in James, he writes that even Satan and the demons believe in God, but they don't fear, that they don't worship him, right? And so this is like a common teaching and a mischaracterization of the understanding of belief into faith in Christianity that I do not align with. And it's that Christianity is not just believing that there is a God. That's a step beyond. And so I think that, like you said, I agree that there can be atheists who believe that there might be a God, or there can, but there's no room for someone who is truly following Jesus to say, "I'm not sure if God is real." Now, doubt is okay. I'm not saying if you're a Christian and you have doubt, that's wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But it's my personal understanding that the role of faith is not in believing in a God. It is in believing God, right? That's what I believe about what faith really is.
Right. And I really don't like it when atheists, my own camp, try to throw the word faith at people, because I don't think Christians have faith. Like, their faith isn't used to say, "I have faith that they exist." No, you believe they exist, and then you trust it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
That
exactly,
faith is,
exactly.
I'm trusting this belief. It is, the faith isn't the belief. The faith is, I trust this belief.
Right. That's exactly what I mean. Like, you hit the nail on the head there. That's where, like, the whole Santa Claus analogy, where I think that's where that falls. Yeah, no, I've seen you make that one, but I I know that one falls through, and that it's not just like, oh, I believe he exists. Because like for kids, like it's like, oh, faith is just believing in the things you can't see, but it's like so much more than that. And it's like,
well, even for that, they trust the claim their parents tell them. For Santa, the faith isn't that
fair enough.
that they believe Santa's real. The faith is that they trust what their parents say that he's real. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Faith is just the trust in that. But yeah, so far as nihilism, we hold that life has no meaning. But even Nietzsche, who basically founded the nihilistic school of thought that nihilism wasn't meant to be the end goal. That our nihilism should lead us to being what he called the Übermensch, which means the overman. We should become more than human, meaning we should strive to be more than our social constructs like morality and law and belief. We should derive our own everything, our own morality, our own law, our own belief, our own deity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And only if we do that, then like just strive.
It's sort of like it's much like transcendentalist thinking.
Essentially, except it's in this realm and not the next.
Right.
Like you're not leaving your existence. You are yourself.
It's despiritualized transcendentalism.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I love that. But yeah.
So do you have what's your second question?
Why did God create evil? And before you say he didn't, I'm sure you know where I'm going. Isaiah 45:7. God created evil. Now, why would a good and all benevolent God create evil?
So let me turn to that verse.
I'm actually getting there too.
All right. I just want to quickly read the context. My phone's like 10%. All right. Isaiah 45:7. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things. That's an interesting verse. Well, what I can respond, first of all, is there's the verse that basically talks about that God is not the author of sin or the author of evil. And
which is why I brought this one up.
Right. I can't think of the exact address of the verse, but it essentially asserts that
I think it's in James.
Evil is not right. That you can't blame God for evil, because he's not the author of evil. But what I can say in this is that I form light, create darkness. I make well-being and create. So,
well, yeah, because in the King James, it says, "I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. I am the Lord. I do these things." That's the King James.
So, quickly, I will say, when it comes to translational history, I do a ton on this. The King James is like 400. It's over 400 years old. And they operated with only a small handful of manuscripts. Like I think it was 7 or 8. Whereas the ESV and more modern translations are working with thousands. So I generally prefer the words that they use. But I think that when he said that he creates calamity, I think that is in the form of judgment. Sorry.
I'm back.
People in the chat are helping me out here, dude. Okay, so someone commented the Hebrew word for evil, ra, does not mean moral evil.
Yeah, I was just going.
What I'm saying is,
I was just going to the Hebrew here. The Hebrew word ra.
Yeah.
Part of it's an adjective. It means bad or evil. Literally right here, bad or evil. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see it. Well, I think what it's talking about here, and he says, "I make well-being and create calamity." So in this verse, he's saying well-being, right? So this is talking about living condition, right? So I think that God, what he's really saying is when he creates calamity, is the word, is that it is actually in the form of judgment, right? It's judgment upon evil. It's not that he is making evil exist, but that he's bringing evil or bad condition or the opposite of well-being or calamity to those who are disobedient. He is the judge. That's the assertion. And I would also say, I form light and create darkness. In the verse before, he's literally talking about the sun rising and setting. And we can look in the Genesis account where it talks about him creating the night and the morning. And I think that's really what that's referencing. But right, when it says he creates calamity, I don't think that means he is making evil exist and that evil is created by God or that sin is created by God, but that God brings judgment or calamity or what man observes as evil upon those who defy him and disobey him.
But to be clear, that's your opinion, right? I want to make it clear that that's your opinion about what that verse means.
Well, I'm saying that sure, but the Christian assertion, and I'd love to read to you more. I'd love to open some commentary on this and read about Hebrew scholars and stuff and how they look at this verse. But what I will say is that the Christian point of view, the general Christian point of view, is that God does not create evil. And
right.
that God has not made.
Right. So in the book of James, it
I don't want to say that that's my opinion. I want to say that that is the Christian opinion. And so I don't think there's any room in the Christian way of thought to say that this implies that God is creating evil. I don't think that's what it means. And I don't think any Christian would assert that it means that. I can open up some. I'm gonna open up some comments. Down it goes. I'm gonna. Here, I need to actually plug my phone in. It's dying. 1 moment. I'm opening up my commentary. I got a huge Bible just for stuff like this. All right, Isaiah
45:7.
Yeah. 46. These pages stick together. It's like the most obnoxious thing. All right. I skipped it. Okay. 45. Let's see, 7. That didn't help me at all. Okay, hold on.
Are you able to edit out the interruptions from the phone call when you put it on?
Yeah. I can go through and make sure.
Because when you're done, I would like a copy if you could.
Yeah, for sure. I will. My Old Testament commentary is downstairs. Basically, what the commentary writer was saying in that verse was God is talking about Cyrus. So in that passage, he's talking about the emperor of Persia, Cyrus, and now he would bring calamity upon the Babylonians who had the Jews in slavery and enslaved. And so we have to, I think you have to look at the scriptures contextually and what he's talking about there. And Isaiah is writing about how Cyrus would bring judgment upon the Babylonians, just as God had brought judgment upon the Jews in sending them and letting them go fall enslaved to the Babylonians. So if you read it contextually, it's not making the assertion that God creates evil, but that he brings calamity or pain or bad, evil, if you will, upon those who defy him.
Okay.
Right.
I guess right. I'll accept that answer. I think either way, but I guess my final one has 2 verses attached to it. If you want to maybe grab a pen, Genesis 22 verse 1 and James 1:13. James 1:13 claims God tempts no man. In fact, I'll go there right now. James.
Right, that's the one I was referencing.
Right.
Earlier.
James 1:13. That was funny enough. That was in my last question. Let no man say that he is tempted. I am tempted of God. Excuse me. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. So this verse says that God cannot tempt anyone. Okay?
Yep.
And now, if you go over to Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am." He tempted Abraham. So
Right. So
did he
that's
tempt Abraham, or
simply
did he
because of
not tempt anyone?
that's because of the word that's used. What we see is that he in this version he is described as testing Abraham. So right. So temptation is to trap. It's basically to set someone up for bad. It's to put someone in a position where they are likely to fall. Whereas he is testing Abraham, meaning he's testing Abraham's strength and testing Abraham's faith, and in doing so, strengthening Abraham. So it's not the same word. It's not the same meaning. He is testing Abraham, not tempting.
All right. Well, if you mind, I'll go to the concordance and see. In this Genesis, it's the Hebrew, because the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. It's nakah, and it means to test, try, prove, to test, and to try, to prove. So
Right.
there's that. But and then I'll go back to James and see what the Greek says there. James 1:13. Tempteth. There we go. It is the Hebrew word parazo, meaning to try whether a thing can be done, or to try, to make a trial of, to test. So it really is to test. Each one means basically to test.
You mean it's the Greek word?
Yeah, I meant Greek word parazo.
Yeah, so I was confused. I was like, wait.
Yeah, it means to attempt or to endeavor, to try a thing, to test, to make a trial. So, I mean, they both mean to test.
I'm going to James.
Yeah. See, that's why I like Blue Letter Bible, because I don't have to open my concordance. It just has one. Like, you can open up every verse in the interlinear here.
Hebrews.
It is my go-to app when I'm studying the Bible. Which even as an atheist, I do.
I've just heard from people that it's not the best for the Greek. But I actually need to look into what the best concordance is for Greek. But no one's saying something. I mean, oh my God.
Well, I have the Strong's concordance in my office.
Right. Okay. So what James. Okay. Right. So we have to look and see what they're actually being tempted towards, what they're being tested on. What we understand is that, first of all, we see it in the intention of God that he was never going to have Abraham kill Isaac, and it was a test of Abraham's obedience. And so what we see in James is he's talking about tempting people or testing people towards evil. Two different things. This is where first God is testing Abraham's obedience, and then here, this is coming from people saying that God would tempt them towards evil. I think these are two different scenarios, two different things. That God was not tempting or testing Abraham towards evil, but here he says, for God cannot be tempted with evil, that God cannot be tested with evil, and he himself tempts no one, that he cannot bring someone to evil. It goes on, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. And that's just essentially making the assertion of sinful nature.
Okay. That's a fair answer. I mean, it is probably correct. That was my gotcha question, to be fair.
I don't like I'm sitting here and I want to just make the blatant statement, well, the Bible doesn't contradict itself, but that's an unfair statement to just say into the air with, and that's a long conversation to talk about. But for me, the way I personally believe is that it doesn't, right? And so when I look at a passage like that, what I have to understand is reading in the totality of Scripture, and this is an important idea, is that we look at, when we interpret one verse or one passage or one chapter, we have to interpret it in light of every other passage, right? That it is self-interpretive, so meaning that when I read a passage and I encounter something that's new, I have to look at what the Bible says about that thing in other places, so that I don't walk away forming a new belief or believing something the Bible doesn't actually teach. So it would be easy to look at this belief of Abraham and say, okay, well, God is tempting people and testing people towards evil. And we see so many other verses that talk about God being the creator of good, that God only associating with us is good, that God and people asserting that God is sinless, that God does not bring people to sin, that God is not that God is slow to anger, and just in descriptions of God, we never see him described as being sinful. And so if we find one that seems like it is, or it seems like God is describing God as evil, we actually have to read that in light of every other passage and in the context of that passage itself. And so if one passage or one verse in particular sticks out and seems to contradict what we believe about what the rest of the Bible says, then that verse, chances are we're looking at it incorrectly. So that's just my understanding of the inerrancy of the Bible.
Okay. I mean, for that verse, I mean, I got more, but I mean, this would go on a month if we.
Yeah.
But what was your third one?
Well, you touched on this a bit earlier, but it's like a series of questions.
Right.
Which was, are you absolutely sure there is no God? Which you said that.
No, I don't think anybody is absolutely sure. I don't think you can be absolutely sure there is one. Do you know what I mean? I can't be absolutely sure there isn't.
That's just like, for me, the way that I look at that is like in talking with academia and making logic-based arguments and stuff like that, anecdotal evidence isn't allowed to be used. It's not. And it sucks because I really just want to cite anecdotal evidence and say, like, based on my personal experience, I know there is a God and there's a reason I have confidence for God because of what I've experienced. But that can't be measured, that can't be proved, and so anecdotal evidence is not enough. The analogy I use, and I'm sure this analogy falls short because I thought of this like 3 a.m. A long time ago, and I can't explain it perfectly now, but it's, and again, I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect analogy, but it's essentially if I were to say to a pregnant woman or someone who's given birth, because I'm a man and I've never given birth, the giving birth isn't painful. And they could say like, well, yes, it is. And you can observe and look at the things that might sort of point to the fact that giving birth is painful. But because I've never given birth, I can't actually say that it is painful. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand the analogy. But
so
I'm talking from an epistemic point of view. Do you know what I mean? Not like a philosophical point of view. Like we could maybe philosophically know there's a God or not. But I'm talking from like an epistemic point. Epistemologically speaking, I mean, we can't 100% know there is or isn't anything, and that's boils down to nihilism right there too, because there's epistemic nihilism too. I mean, we can know about, like there's a lamp right here, like, but do you know there's a lamp there? Like, can you epistemologically know there's a lamp sitting here to my right? I mean, I can show you the lamp, but do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, what was the other part?
I get that. I mean, so for me, like, for a long time now, I have believed, and I do believe with 100% certainty that God exists, but either I'm just arrogant or I've had some sort of experience that could bring me to that point, because I didn't believe that before. I didn't understand it that way before, and now I do. And so that's why you'll hear me. You may have even heard me talk about it last night. And this is the very Christian phrase, it's relationship, not religion. And that is that for me, and again, because this is anecdotal, it doesn't have to apply to you. It doesn't have to apply to anyone really, except for me, because this is a thing. But I heard my buddy say this one time, and he basically said that God is more real to him than I am to him. It's the idea that God is more real to me than you are to me. And that sounds crazy, and I sound ridiculous making that claim, but that's my understanding, and that's what I believe. And so that's why I've been led away from. I can understand why someone would come to a nihilistic view. I think I very well may be one if I did not know God, if I was not a Christian. But again, I wish I could scientifically verify anecdotal evidence. That's just not the way that works.
Right. Like I made a video asking people to prove God epistemologically, and a lot of the videos I was tagged in were them giving their personal experience, and they were sick and they were healed, or You know, they were not going to walk or I'm like, I'm very happy that you're well. But if it does prove it, it only proves it to you, you know?
Right.
I mean, it
I
might
get
prove
that.
it. It might prove to you, but it can only ever prove it to you, you know?
Yeah.
It can't be
I
used as an
understand that. I
epistemological
totally
standard.
understand that. I am much like you. I'm very logic based, very analytical. And so for me, the way I look at it now, and again, this only serves as an anecdote, but me being someone who is, for the longest time, my thinking was entirely based on facts, on what was scientifically measurable, on the analytical side of things, and I've come to the conclusion of Jesus by following logical reasoning for me. And so I think that logic leads people to different destinations, for sure. But I will say one thing I've noticed in your videos, and I commented about this, was the video where you were telling Christians to prove God. In many of the videos, you responded, okay, sure, that proves that there's a God. Like there was Richard, oh, there's the call again. Yo, bro, if anybody in here is calling him or leaking his number, please stop. That's not cool. It's really not cool. So if y'all would please stop doing that. Don't call him. It's really obnoxious. He's not a bad guy. I've DM'd him and talked to him. I think I said the wrong name. I think he's a great dude. There he goes. That's really frustrating. And it really hurts my heart that people would find any pleasure in just messing with this dude. But I've talked to him plenty of times and spent a lot of time DMing him and talking to him and getting to know who he is. He even began at the start that he was not here to get a rise out of anyone, that he trolls on the internet for entertainment. And so I think that's childish to do that to him. I think he openly said that the videos he makes on TikTok and stuff are to troll. Like there's nothing wrong with that. You have your beliefs of what the internet should be used for. I have mine, he has his. So just sorry, I'm just ranting about people just being absolutely rude for no reason to you. That this bothers me.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, I'm kind of a troll's troll.
Yeah, you provoke for sure. You're
I'm like the atheist Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yeah.
I like to think of myself as the atheist leftist version of Milo Yiannopoulos. I will poke a goat to watch it kick me.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. That makes sense. But yeah, so what I was saying was, on your video where you basically talked about telling people to prove that there was a God, the most common response I found from you was, sure, that proves there's a God. And what I was going to cite was Richard Dawkins basically talking about intelligent design.
Right.
And saying how like it takes an intelligent sentient being to create like an encyclopedia. Whereas we look at humanity and say inside of a single blood cell, like the DNA strands contain information that would occupy 1,000 encyclopedias. And so like,
yeah. Oh, the basic premise I was getting at with that is like, even if I grant intelligent design, even if I grant that the universe was made by something intelligent and it was designed this way for a purpose, at best, that gets you to deism.
Right. And so that's exactly what I was about to get at. And so the thing was for me though was that you said in the video you can't use your Bible. And so
well, here's the reason I said that is because I believe like to try to use the Bible to prove the validity of the Bible alone.
Right.
Like, when I say you can't use the Bible, I mean, you can't use it alone. Do you know what I mean? Like
okay, I get that. I just wanted to understand that better because I understand it's circular reasoning. You say the Bible is true because it says it's true, therefore it's true, believe it. That's not how things work. That's a logical fallacy, and I know you love your logical fallacies, so I'm not going to try and cite one of those at you. But yeah, I did mention that I think that there are some historically like verifiable things that you can look at that actually point to the Christian God. I'll get some sources for you eventually, but a few examples we can look at. The Jews in Egypt, for a very long time, the historians said that there never was a Semitic people in Egypt, at least during the time period of Ramses. They said that during his reign there were no Jews there, but what we look at and we see that oftentimes in the Bible, locations and geographical spots are updated as those things, those places are renamed or whatever. The authors will change the name of that place to better suit the newer audience. And so we had historians and archaeologists looking in the wrong time period for this, these exiled Jews, these Semitic peoples, and they didn't find anything. But recently, within the past few years, they actually found, it's talked about in Genesis about how the Pharaoh gives Joseph and his family the best land in Egypt. A large and what we see as a quickly expanding Semitic community was in Egypt. And we find that there is like a sudden decline in them. We can see what is assumed to be the tomb of Joseph is actually crazy. Again, I have to send you all these sources, but I don't want to just make claims that it's true. But for example, we found a traditionally Egyptian governmental tomb. It's like a mini pyramid, and inside they found a statue of of a man with the artistic stylization that the Egyptians commonly associate with Semitic people, meaning he had curly red hair on the statue, and they actually found that he had a striped colored hoodie or a striped colored jacket by analyzing the paint on the statue. And so they assume that that's Joseph. And then the archaeologists have found in the Red Sea, right, they found chariots and weapons, and of course those can just be said that they were there at a later point. But with the Jews crossing the Red Sea and then collapsing in on the Egyptians, that could be a plausible explanation. Another one is Jericho. Something really, really interesting about Jericho is that archaeologists did find the walls of Jericho. And what we know is that one part of the wall, right? So in the time of Jericho, people, and many times throughout cities like this, the poor people lived inside of the walls, right? We know about the story of Rahab in Genesis, or in Joshua.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely Joshua.
Joshua. The story of Rahab is that she was a prostitute, meaning she was very poor, and the Jews, the spies, came in and promised that if they helped her, or if she helped them, then God would spare her. And what archaeologists have found in digging up the site, basically, is that one part of the wall fell dramatically longer after the rest of the entirety of the wall, and they assume that would have been where Rahab's home was. Again, those are just a couple. I'll get those sources to you.
Right.
Again, because I haven't cited any sources, you don't actually have to make any response, because I can't prove that's credible by just spitting it out at you. But I think that there is, and we look at Jewish, Christian, and Roman historians talking about Jesus. I think that there are definitely documents where you can see where Christians added certain things in, but we can see what were the genuine words of those historians. Some of them, of course, dating a few decades after Jesus. Many of them were just children or not even alive when Jesus was alive. But what we see is that they at least describe that Jesus was alive. And so we know, you would know that most historians agree, if not all, they unanimously agree that Jesus was a real person who existed.
I'm willing to stipulate that fact, because it doesn't really, I don't want that to be the mountain I die on. You know what I mean? Because I've read Tacitus, I've read the Josephus, and while I don't hold much faith or trust in the Josephus writing about Jesus, because it's in a whole different voice. Because in all of the other times Josephus mentions Jesus, it's not in this. Because in the Flavianum, he was talking zealously, and Josephus never did that. Josephus never spoke zealously and called him a good man and all this.
Yeah. So there were, right. So that's why I'm saying that we can look and see that Christians over time actually inserted details into the historical writings.
But I think
historians have gone through and estimated what.
Right. I really do think like Christopher Hitchens said. I don't know if you know who he is. Christopher Hitchens. Well, he's dead now, but he said there's something to be said about the forgery. Like the simple fact that there is a forgery there lends some credibility to the story that maybe there was a historical man that existed. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like I'm willing to grant. I don't know, and I don't. I mean, I think it's spurious at best, but I'm willing to grant that there was a historical man, a Hebrew named Jesus of this time period. Uh, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So then, if Jesus was who he says he is, do you have like any? Do you find any issue with his teaching?
One more time.
So if the things recorded about Jesus are true, if he really said all the things in the Bible, do you find any issue with his teaching?
No, I mean, he was a radical socialist. But like, it's like Gandhi said. It's like Gandhi said, I love your Jesus.
I love your
I
Jesus, but I
hate
don't
your
love your Christians.
Christians.
Right.
Yeah. I'm
So then your disagreement falls in line with what certain Christians believe.
right. I mean, it isn't like, even if you like, the simple fact that Jesus existed doesn't mean that he was of divine nature or anything. I mean, because I exist, you exist, but I mean, David Koresh exists, and he definitely claimed, you know what I mean? Not every person who claims to be divine is divine. And we definitely know David Koresh exists. Um, you know who I mean? The Waco, Texas guy. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but no, even if he taught all the things he taught, it doesn't mean like as a nihilist, I shouldn't really care. I shouldn't really care what you believe. Do you know what I mean? And to be fair,
Right.
If you want to believe that unicorns rule the universe and they're going to take you away to Neverland and you get to live with ponies the rest of your existence, I mean, I don't care. I'm not mocking your religion. I'm just saying something. But it is what people do with those beliefs. Do you know what I mean? Like the things done in the name of Jesus, or the things done in the name of Allah. I would say Buddha, but there's not much done in the name of Buddha. Right. I mean, people on the left, and this is a problem with people on my side of the political aisle.
We're so, oh my God.
The live, I think the live is about to automatically end because it ends after about an hour. So if it does, I'll probably restart it and just
All right. Yeah.
add you back to it.
My problem with people on my side of the aisle politically is we're so terrified to criticize Islam. Because here's the thing: to criticize your religion, to criticize your beliefs, is not criticizing you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, you're criticizing Islam, you must hate Muslims," or "You're criticizing Christianity, you must hate Christians." Why are you attacking them? I'm literally not. I mean, in my videos, I do get kind of trolly, but to criticize every idea, good or bad or anything, is open to critique. Mine, yours, everybody's. That is the essence of the Socratic method. Socrates, in fact, lost his life over it, for blasphemy of all things. And people say, "Oh, did Socrates really exist?" I don't care if he existed. I mean, nobody is telling me that I'm going to die if I don't believe he existed. I'm going to hell for not believing in Socrates. I mean, because somebody would have advanced that kind of teaching. Whether it wasn't him, it would have been somebody. And he never claimed that this kind of epistemological way of knowing things was divinely inspired or anything. So, I mean, if it wasn't Socrates, it would have been somebody. But he literally lost his life for blasphemy, just for questioning their belief, not them. And all he wanted to do was say, "Listen, I don't care what you believe. I want you to justify why you believe and think rationally about it." Like when I question a person's belief, I'm not saying stop believing it. I mean, if you want to believe it, I mean, if you want to believe anything, as a nihilist, I shouldn't care. And I don't what you believe. My goal is to make you think critically about what you believe and why you